Here's 7 things that I stopped doing that ended up helping me lose a lot more body fat and get where I wanted to be in terms of my fat loss. Some of them you've probably heard before, but it never hurts to hear them again and understand a different perspective. So I encourage you to listen to each one and understand the takeaways out of this. Now, the first one is I stopped counting calories like a maniac. I still keep track. I still believe that thermodynamics is important. I believe in energy balance, don't get me wrong. But when I stopped focusing on every calorie and I focused on nutrient density, a lot of things happened. I focused on the nutrition that was in my food, and I focused on the actual satiety effect of the nutrition that was in my food. So rather than counting every calorie and maybe having a little bit of junk here and there and just making sure that I was, getting the exact amount of what I needed, I focused on wholesome food. And that led me to focus on satiety. And consequently, it made me focus on activity because I had more energy. So then I could focus on my calories out because I had the energy and I had the clarity and I had the ability to perform. But I also focused on my happiness versus focusing on every little number. Personally, I feel like religiously tracking ends up setting you up for a lot of distress. I feel like it's important to understand where you're at, but I feel like tracking is most important to understand where your protein is. I feel like that's the only reason I would track these days, not to necessarily see where my calories are. I'm just not that worried about it. I'm more concerned with how much protein am I getting, because that can be a little bit tricky. Sometimes you don't realize you're getting enough. Sometimes, you think you got enough, but you're 50 grams shy. That's the only reason I see to track. So I focus on wholesome foods, good fruits, good proteins, good meats, good dairy, good veggies, you name it. The next one is I stopped thinking that cardio would kill my gains. Truly, like when I stopped thinking that cardio was the enemy and I doubled down on what I enjoy, which is running, which is high intensity interval training, which is sprinting, which is biking, which is lots of hiking and rucking, those kinds of things make me happy. But those kinds of things also burn a heck of a lot of fat without me even thinking about it. If I go out and I enjoy my run or I enjoy a hike with the family and I don't subconsciously limit my ability to do that because I think it's going to burn up muscle, it's amazing how much leaner I get, but also how much more muscular I look as a result. Not to mention the literature is quite strong supporting VO2 max for longevity, but also VO2 max for muscle, cardio in general for muscle because of angiogenesis, a strong heart, you name it. As a matter of fact, I think it improved my lifting. It changed how I looked at things. I had better recovery in between sets, so my workout volume increased. The moment that I shifted that way of thinking and I stopped alienating cardio and I embraced it, I got way leaner and felt a lot better. This next one's gonna ruffle some feathers, but you have to hear me out on it because it's not just taking it at face value. I stopped thinking of fat as fuel, and I started thinking of fat as a vital nutrient. I think a big mistake that we make, especially people that have come out of the lower carb community, is to think of fat as a fuel source. It certainly is. Our body will tap into our own fat as a fuel source via beta oxidation, a number of different pathways. But eating fat to burn fat is misleading. The more fat you eat, you don't just burn more magically. The more fat you eat, the more calories you consume, but also the more fat you potentially store if you're not utilizing it. So do I think that you should reduce your fat intake? Not necessarily, not at all, really. I think that you should view fats as a nutrient and stop bucketing fats as just general fat and think of fats for what they are, different nutritional values with different fats, okay? Polyunsaturated fats from things like fish oil, super high up on the list, are completely different than, say, a myristic acid saturated fat, whereas like a stearic acid saturated fat is a little bit higher, right? They all are different, and I encourage people to do their research on what kind of fats they're consuming. You hear me talk about monounsaturated fats like olive oil, like avocado oil, like macadamia nut oil all the time. That's because I don't look at fats as a fuel source. I look at fats as a source of nutrition. And for if you're interested, I put a link down below for a free box of Namibian sea salt macadamia nuts and 20% off whatever you want to get from House of Macadamia. Literally a bunch of macadamia nuts free and 20% off whatever you want from them. So House of Macadamias is a sponsor on this channel. So House of Macadamia grows their macadamia nuts in South Africa, and then they're harvested about an hour's drive from where they're processed. So everything is super close proximity. So you're getting freshness and you're getting tremendous taste, but you're also supporting the farmers and you're supporting the local communities there, which is one of the reasons why they can get the prices down so low. It's going to be one of the most affordable kinds of macadamia nuts you can find, if not the cheapest. Honestly, I've looked around. So that link is down below, saves you 20% off, and using that special link gets you a free box of Namibian sea salt macadamia nuts. This is a very important one. I really hope that you're still with me on this video, okay? Because I think this is going to resonate with a lot of people. And I have to kind of be realistic. I see a lot of people developing real deep psychological issues as a result of social media. So what I stopped doing is I stopped trying to do things that people on social media were doing. It's one thing to get an idea. It's another thing to get analysis paralysis because Peter Attia does one thing, Andrew Huberman does another thing, Rhonda Patrick does another thing, Joe Rogan does another thing, Mike Mutzel does another thing, and this is not on anything bad on any of them. I actually like all these people. They're all in my circle. But the point is that when you start trying to do everything that everyone is doing, you're going to drive yourself utterly nuts. It would literally get to a point where I would get to the gym and I would think, okay, I want to try this because Peter was talking about it, but I want to do this because Andrew was talking about it. And I would end up in this point where I would be thinking so much, just get in the gym and get it done and do what works for you. And some of the special operations people that I have worked with over the years have taught me really important things. And some of that is just, it's okay to do you. What works for you as a stimulus, as a workout, as nutrition is concerned, is totally cool. Just because it works for someone else, it does not mean it's going to work for you. So adopt principles from people, but don't try to live each other's lifestyle. Don't try to live my lifestyle. Trust me, you don't want to be me. You want to take bits and pieces that you can learn from me, but look around at other people and just get little bits and pieces so you develop you. This is a huge one. Number 5, I stopped confusing hunger with boredom. And I stopped thinking that I was hungry just because my brain was telling me I was hungry. And I learned a lot of this through fasting. Now I know that some of you don't like fasting and some of you love it. The bottom line is that I think it's great. And one of the things that it has taught me is that when I get hungry, I'm not really starving. Hunger is complicated, and we've only scratched the very, very surface of it to understand what is actually driving hunger. And I would put money on the fact that it's arguably a lot more psychological than it is physiological. Our bodies have pretty amazing mechanisms to keep us fueled, whether it's body fat on hand, whether it's gluconeogenesis from stored fat or stored protein or whatever we need to convert into glucose. Bottom line is our bodies are efficient. And they are much more intelligent than we might give them credit for in our own experiences in our psychological realm. So when I learned that, well, shoot, I could go 48 hours without food, not saying you have to do this, I realized that, that hunger that I thought I had was probably just boredom. And having a little bit of water seemed to just nullify the issue altogether. So if you're not fasting, how do you take this as advice? Well, try doing something when you get hungry. Try going for a walk. Try just doing something to occupy your mind and see if the hunger goes away. If that walk is legitimately difficult because you're hungry, then you know you're actually hungry. If that task is legitimately difficult, then you're probably actually hungry. But if doing that task just gets your mind off of eating and you feel great, trust me, it's only going to help you get leaner and get the body you want. Number 6 is I stopped thinking that veggie starches were a problem. When I first was doing a low carb protocol, maybe 12 years ago or so, I really was concerned with all kinds of vegetables, even starchy vegetables, especially starchy vegetables, but even like cruciferous vegetables. I was like, every single carbohydrate was going to be a problem. But I really developed an issue with things like butternut squash or with other starchy vegetables that might have a few carbs in them. I saw them as problematic. I saw them as sugar. And when I realized that a lot of these starchy vegetables in small amounts were tremendous sources of vitamins, minerals, fiber, things that I needed for, well, what was the first thing that I talked about? Nutrition density. I realized that these were very important parts of that. And I was lacking micronutrients, I was lacking minerals, and just the nutrient density that I needed to really get where I wanted to go. So even though I was still doing low carb, I stopped worrying about the occasional starchy carb, because a lot of times it gave me the focus and the energy to burn right through them in the first place and end up right back where I wanted to be anyway, but just in a more pleasant fashion. Number 7 is one of the biggest ones, and it's such a controversial piece. It's controversial because you have two sides of this entire nutrition equation fighting over this, when in reality, we all should just agree, no matter what side of the coin you're on, whether you're a low carb person, whether you're a high carb person, it doesn't matter. And that's the fact that I stopped thinking that insulin was the bad guy. And this might sound totally foreign, because I've literally done videos talking about how hyperinsulinemia is a problem. Hyperinsulinemia is a problem. Having chronically high levels of insulin, chronically high fasting insulin is an issue, a serious issue, okay? But having insulin in the first place is not a problem. Having an insulin spike is one of the most important things that you need for cellular metabolism, for growth, for repair, for energy. If we are always in an effort to avoid foods that spike insulin, like, we're not living our life, and we're not giving our bodies one of the most important peptide hormones that they need to literally survive. When you have protein, you spike insulin. So I don't care whether you never touch a carb again. If you're fearing insulin, you're fearing life. So we need to stop the demonization of that. So all those years that I spent thinking about how to avoid massive insulin spikes, when I should have been thinking, how do I get the insulin back down after I have the spike? Because the insulin spike isn't the problem. It's when it stays high that it's the problem. So instead of thinking about that, I thought, okay, my insulin spiked. How do I get it back down? Through healthy lifestyle, through good protein consumption, through fiber consumption, through high intensity interval training, through various forms of activity, through lower stress, through good sleep, all the boring stuff that nobody wants to hear. So I'm sure I could think of more, but these 7 things that I stopped doing made it so that I seamlessly, effortlessly got under 10% body fat. I'll see you tomorrow.